From today, I live here, so get out. My brother-in-law said this nonchalantly with a smirk. What? What do you mean? I was only bewildered by my brother-in-law's abrupt statement. Seeing this, Julia, who had been watching, said with a delighted laugh, "We will pay the $400 for the loan." They said they would pay the loan, and I didn't want to talk to them any longer. We packed our things and left the house without telling anyone. My mother-in-law was completely on their side. Then, a month later, the phone rang. It was from my mother-in-law. Just as I thought, I smirked and turned off my smartphone. "I'm Courtney. This year I turned 36. I met my husband, Nick, at work, and we got married. Initially, we lived in a rented apartment, but a turning point came about 3 years after our marriage. Rebuild our house and live together?" Nick suddenly suggested this. I was inwardly surprised by Nick's unexpected remark. "Yeah, that's right. My mom has been living alone at home, right? Her legs are getting weaker, and it seems to be her limit. The current house has many steps and is old. I think rebuilding it into a duplex is the best idea." I see. I was confused by Nick's sudden proposal. Normally, as the younger son, Nick wouldn't need to take care of his mother, but there was a reason he brought up. First, my father-in-law, who is my mother-in-law's husband, had already passed away. He died of illness before I met Nick. Since then, it seemed Nick and his mother had been living together. Nick also has an older brother, but he had left home many years ago. The reason was an argument with my deceased father-in-law. It seems the relationship between my brother-in-law and my father-in-law was quite bad. My father-in-law, who was serious and proper, my brother-in-law, who was free-spirited and careless, probably didn't get along. Even I could easily imagine that, though I only knew the stories. Though they argued almost daily, at some point my father-in-law, angered, forcibly kicked my brother-in-law out. Since then, he hadn't returned home. It seems my mother-in-law had informed my brother-in-law when my father-in-law was bedridden and when he passed away. However, he neither came in haste nor showed his face at the funeral. After that, a significant rift had formed between my brother-in-law and Nick. Nick was worried about his mother but didn't want to rely on his brother. Considering this, I made a decision. "Understood. I'll live with your mother." "Courtney, are you really okay with this?" Nick asked anxiously, and I shared my thoughts with him. "I don't have parents. I'll treat your mother as my real mother." "Courtney, thank you." Nick hugged me happily. When we informed my mother-in-law of our intention to live together, she seemed surprised but was very pleased. "I don't know how to thank you, Miss Courtney. Thank you." Thus, the three of us began living together. Of course, this was after demolishing the old house and rebuilding it. The first floor was for my mother-in-law, and the second floor became our living space. We could move between each other's spaces via the staircase. We installed separate sinks and kitchens. This way, even living together, we could establish our lifestyles. The issue was money, but fortunately both Nick and I worked and had sufficient income and financial flexibility, so we passed the loan screening. Upon seeing the newly renovated house, my mother-in-law was in tears. "Nick, Courtney, thank you." Seeing my mother-in-law's tears, we as a couple felt truly glad that we had decided to rebuild and live together. A new life begins from here. I am brimming with excitement and anticipation. However, this feeling shattered in just half a year, because the older brother appeared. It was one Sunday. Nick and I were about to have lunch in the living room of my mother-in-law, who lives on the first floor. We often have lunch with my mother-in-law on days off. The meal was mainly simple food, made easy for my mother-in-law to eat. Just as we were about to eat, the doorbell rang. Who could it be on a Sunday like this? I muttered inadvertently. Then Nick stood up from his seat and spoke to me. I'll go check it out, Courtney. You stay here with Mom. Thanks, Nick. As Nick headed to the entrance, it wasn't long before I could hear voices arguing. Mother, I'm worried about Nick, so I'll go check on him too. When I expressed concern to my mother-in-law, she responded a bit awkwardly. Feeling something off about her demeanor, I hurried to where Nick was. At the entrance, there was a middle-aged man and woman, and the air between them and Nick was tense. Nick was shouting at the two to leave, and they were arguing back just as fiercely. I cautiously asked Nick, Nick, who are these people? Do you know them? As I was asking Nick, I heard my mother-in-law's voice from behind. Ethan, you came? While glancing at my mother-in-law, who was excited, Nick said with a sigh, The man in front of you is my brother, Ethan. I don't know the woman though. Since my brother-in-law had been estranged and hadn't even attended our wedding, this was my first time meeting him. This is my wife, Julia. We got married a year ago. My brother-in-law introduced Julia to us with a pleased look on his face. Nice to meet you. I'm Julia, Ethan's wife. Julia seemed older than me, though she was wearing makeup. Moreover, her demeanor was quite casual, and she was wearing a short skirt as if trying to appear youthful. Nick spoke with a look of disbelief. I don't care that you got married, but why did you come back? When Nick glared at his brother, Ethan replied jokingly, Mom called me. She said to come and see the renovation. Hearing this, Nick directed a sharp gaze at his mother. Mom, what do you mean by this? My mother-in-law should have known about the strained relationship between Nick and his brother. Yet, she carelessly said, Well, Ethan is my child too, right? I still want us to get along. Dad has passed away, so I thought it might be okay. We were dumbfounded by her words. It's unimaginable to invite a brother-in-law with whom Nick has a bad relationship to the house just because my father-in-law has died. Moreover, while the house and land are in my mother-in-law's name, it is Nick and I who are paying the rebuilding loan. If she was going to invite my brother-in-law, she should have asked us first. It seemed Nick was thinking the same thing as he retorted to his mother. It's not right to call him over without telling us, is it? Don't you think it's wrong to Courtney, who agreed to live with us? Being scolded by Nick, my mother-in-law turned to apologize to me. I'm sorry, Courtney, but I'm getting old. Meeting him occasionally should be okay, right? My mother-in-law seemed not to feel any guilt, calmly making such a statement. Then my brother-in-law also grinned. Originally, this land belongs to Mom, right? So as her son, I have the right to come to this house, right? Exactly. Don't you think it's unfair that just you guys live in such a nice house? Julia, who had just met us, brazenly chimed in with Ethan. Finally, unable to hide his irritation, Nick exploded. Do whatever you want, but don't come upstairs. That's mine and Courtney's space. With that, Nick said no more and hurried upstairs. "Wait, Nick!" I hurried after Nick. I didn't notice it at that moment because of the situation, but Ethan and Julia were smirking. After that, Ethan and Julia started coming over regularly. When I came home from work, I could hear their laughter coming from the living room on the first floor. To get to our living space on the second floor, you have to enter through the shared entrance and go up the stairs. Each time Ethan and his wife came, it was unpleasant. Because they always left their shoes scattered around and left their wet umbrellas inside on rainy days. I frowned at Ethan and his wife's behavior, as if they owned the place. Of course, Nick was also upset with Ethan and his wife's behavior. Why do they come so often? It's not his house anymore. However, my mother-in-law seemed to think differently from us, welcoming Ethan and his wife every time. No matter how much we cautioned her, she always ended up inviting them. Whatever Nick and I said seemed futile. Ethan has settled down since he got married, and I'm happy to see him always. My mother-in-law only said this cheerfully. Nick and I were disgusted by her attitude. Then something unbelievable happened. I came home from work and went up to our living space on the second floor. That day, Ethan and his wife were not there. What is this? I was shocked when I looked into the living room on the second floor. The living room table was littered with snacks. Moreover, those snacks were the ones I had bought as a treat for myself, eating them little by little. It wasn't just the snacks. In a panic, I opened the refrigerator, and it was empty. Beer for evening drinks, meat, vegetables were all gone. Why is there nothing left? I immediately went down to the first floor where my mother-in-law was elegantly drinking coffee. "Mother, something terrible has happened!" I almost shouted, and she slowly turned around. "What's all the fuss about?" Desperately, I explained to my mother-in-law what I had seen in the living room on the second floor. Then, unbelievably, she laughed amusedly and said, "It was probably Ethan and Julia, right? They said, 'We want to see upstairs too,' and went up the stairs." What? I felt a deep anger from the pit of my stomach. I couldn't believe they had come upstairs without our permission, let alone messed around in someone else's room. I strongly appealed to my mother-in-law. "You know that the second floor is our living space, right? Please tell those two to never come upstairs again." Rummaging through the refrigerator as if it's their own is just like theft. As I reapproached her in a stern tone, my mother-in-law reluctantly nodded. All right. Of course, I discussed this incident with Nick as well. He was very angry. "What? That's unbelievable. I'll also have a strong word with Mom." Nick was supposed to have firmly set boundaries with my mother-in-law, but food continued to disappear from the refrigerator regularly after that. It's been taken again. Every time I look in the fridge, I feel disheartened. No matter how many times I plead with my mother-in-law, it has no effect. On the contrary, she cries out, "I did tell them, Ethan and Julia are family too, aren't they? There's no need to make such a fuss about it," mimicking a victim. We thought it over and realized we had no choice but to stop using the fridge except when necessary. A month later, the inevitable happened. It was Sunday, and Nick and I happened to be at home. There were signs of tampering in other parts of the living room as well. My clothes and cosmetics seemed to have been used. Despite warning Ethan and Julia through my mother-in-law not to eat or use our things without permission, they continued unabated. It was our house, yet we couldn't feel secure leaving our belongings. Nick and I were completely worn out by Ethan and his wife's behavior. At that moment, the doorbell rang. "Oh, welcome!" I could hear the pleasure in my mother-in-law's voice as she greeted them. It was almost certainly Ethan and his wife. "I can't stand this any longer. Let's confront them directly." When I spoke to Nick, who had always been bitter about his brother, he strongly agreed. "Yeah, we have to tell them directly. Let's go talk to them now." We immediately went down to the living room on the first floor, where my mother-in-law lived. "Excuse us." Nick and I entered the living room, where we found Ethan and Julia lounging around. "What's up? It's unusual to see you both down here." "Yeah, you usually don't come down here." Ethan and Julia looked at us, as if they were enjoying the situation. I told them firmly, "The second floor is mine and Nick's living space. Could you please not enter it again?" Ethan then laughed, as if he was choking. "Come on, we're family, don't sweat the small stuff." Julia chimed in, clearly not planning to stop. Nick yelled at them too. "You always eat everything in the fridge. If you continue to do whatever you want, don't ever come here again." "Huh?" Ethan's mood soured. At that moment, my mother-in-law cried out in anguish. "Oh no, then I won't be able to see Ethan and Julia." I quietly reasoned with my mother-in-law. "We are the ones paying the loan for this house, so Nick and I have the right to say no to these people." However, the next moment Ethan grinned slyly and blurted out, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, "From today, I live here, so get out." What? What do you mean? I was only bewildered by Ethan's abrupt statement. Julia, having witnessed this, declared, "We will pay the $400 for the loan." Julia said this with a delighted laugh. "What do you mean by $400 for the loan?" Nick muttered, frowning. I was also clueless and just tilted my head, not bothering to ask Julia directly. I thought it was pointless to discuss any further. Glancing at Nick, I saw him nodding with a look of dismay. "Understood. Then we will leave this house. In exchange, we will transfer the loan to your name, Ethan. That's all right, isn't it?" I pressed for confirmation, and Ethan answered with a smirk. "Yeah, change it. And just hurry up and leave." Then, the next moment, Julia hugged Ethan. "We get to live in this house? I'm so happy." My mother-in-law also exclaimed joyfully, "It's great that I can live with the bright and easygoing Julia. Courtney has been too strict." Saying this, my mother-in-law sighed towards me. It seemed she never really thought well of me. "Mom, isn't that too harsh towards Courtney, who has always been good to you?" Nick tried to defend me, but it didn't matter to me. My mother-in-law was completely on Ethan and his wife's side. If that was the case, there was no need for us, the younger son and his wife, to take care of them any longer. We packed our things and left the house. "Thank you for everything." I said just that and left the house with Nick. They couldn't hide their joy that this new house had become theirs. "Don't ever come back," Ethan sneered as he drove us out. Then a month later, the phone rang. We had just found a new place to live and said goodbye to living in a hotel. I was enjoying a graceful coffee time after unpacking when the annoying ringtone sounded. I looked at my smartphone and saw who was calling. It was my mother-in-law. I thought so. I smirked and turned off my smartphone. But no matter how much I ignored it, The calls kept coming endlessly. This would interfere with other contacts. I had no choice but to answer the phone. What exactly is going on? It was my mother-in-law's number, but it was Julia who started chatting on the other end. She probably borrowed my mother-in-law's phone to contact me. What do you mean? What are you talking about? I had an idea of what it was about, but I played dumb. Julia, sounding distressed, pleaded on the other end. It's about the rebuilding loan. Was the $400 a month a lie? Why is the bill $2,000, 5 times more? Julia raised her voice almost to tears, and I informed her calmly. The monthly loan amount is indeed $2,000. Nick and I were the ones paying it every month. I wondered what she was getting at. Then Julia revealed something unexpected. But mother-in-law said she's been giving you $400 a month. If it's not for the loan, what was that money for? It seemed my mother-in-law was beside her because she also began to accuse from the other end of the phone. Wasn't that the loan amount, Courtney? Were you unfairly taking money from me every month? My mother-in-law interrogated me as if blaming me. To say taking advantage seemed a bit much. I hadn't realized they trusted me so little. I sighed deeply. There was no reason for my mother-in-law to say that for just $400. Nick and I were paying much more every month. The $400 was for helping out a bit with the utilities and groceries. Didn't you say it was tough to shop because of your bad legs? That's why I went to the supermarket to buy groceries and put them in your fridge. Well, $400 wasn't nearly enough, so we were covering the shortfall. Is that so? I didn't know. My mother-in-law spoke as if hearing this for the first time. I was sure I had explained everything clearly at the beginning, but it seems she hadn't understood at all. I told this to Julia. By the way, the cost of living for your mother-in-law, the amount you've been receiving is more than 3 times what it actually costs, you know? But from now on, Nick and I won't be covering her living expenses anymore. It's up to you and Ethan to manage from now on. As soon as I pushed back, Julia started to panic and her voice trembled. I'm a housewife and Ethan only works in a small company's office. We don't have that kind of money. We can't even afford the $2,000 loan. It seemed Ethan had come over after hearing Julia and my mother-in-law making a fuss, and he spoke in a puzzled tone. Wait, you guys, a $2,000 loan? Plus mom's living expenses? How much do you earn anyway? Are you saying you live very tightly? Ethan couldn't believe that we could afford such amounts. I decided to enlighten my disbelieving brother-in-law. Nick and I work for a large corporation, so we can still save money each month even after paying that amount. Plus, I invest, so we have a decent financial cushion. I work at a major brokerage firm. To understand the financial products I deal with, I started investing part of my salary since my early career days. It was a jackpot, and it has made our life quite comfortable. Otherwise, I wouldn't buy slightly expensive treats as rewards. Upon learning about our situation, Ethan voiced his frustration. Damn, no matter how much I work, my salary doesn't increase. Ethan lamented, but it was his own doing. He had always lived carelessly, never striving hard, and looked down on serious people, as Nick had told me. With such an attitude, it's unlikely he would land a good job. Moreover, from what I could see, Ethan did not do overtime. If there isn't much overtime pay, it's understandable that his salary wouldn't change much. Amidst this, Ethan suddenly blurted out something ridiculous. That's it, I'll divorce Julia and remarry you. What? My voice inadvertently flipped in a surprise. I couldn't understand how he could come up with such an idea in this situation. After all, I dislike such irresponsible men. Ethan went on as if he had come up with a brilliant idea. It doesn't matter anyway, right? Nick and I are brothers, so it's all the same who is the husband. Besides, Julia doesn't bring in any money, and I want to live as comfortably as possible without working much. While Ethan spoke, Julia could be heard yelling on the phone. Ethan, what are you talking about? Why would you say that about me? Julia complained, but Ethan did not attempt to soothe her. He seemed very concerned about his own well-being, and my mother-in-law jumped at her son's self-centered suggestion. That's a good idea. It would be nice to have the breadwinner back in this house. Courtney, come back and continue contributing money like before. I want to use my pension as pocket money. Right? Isn't that okay? My mother-in-law, forgetting what she had done to me, pleaded sweetly. This solves everything in one go, right? I'm a genius. Ethan praised his own ridiculous plan. As I was contemplating how to respond, Nick, who had finished unpacking and was listening next to me, spoke up. I will never leave Courtney. Plus, didn't the loan transfer to you, brother? We're absolutely not changing it back now. Nick's voice was surprisingly low. He must have been very angry. I was glad to hear Nick state this so decisively. Then Ethan quickly retorted, But man, with my current salary, there's no way I can pay such a high loan. Someone, either of you, just come back home. Or at least send the loan payments each month. After confidently declaring they would live there and being so ecstatic about it. This attitude? There was really nothing to do but be astounded by my brother-in-law's behavior. I coldly asked, why should we pay the loan for a house we were told to leave? That is, Ethan seemed to stumble over his words, perhaps because he had been hit where it hurt. Julia and my mother-in-law also seemed to think they were at a disadvantage and remained silent. Facing the three of them, I spoke clearly. You are no longer family to us, Mother and Ethan. From now on, we will cut all ties with you. We won't help you financially, not even a single penny. Nick supported my statement. You and Ethan's family will have to figure out the loan on your own. We've already started our new life, and we no longer care. It seemed Nick had completely run out of patience with his mother. That's understandable. Despite our care and closeness, we had experienced the ultimate betrayal from her. I couldn't forgive them either. Hearing our decision, my mother-in-law voiced her pain. Courtney, Nick, I'm sorry, please come back. We'll live on the first floor. You guys can live upstairs like before. Unbelievable. Despite the cause being their own, Ethan still expected us to look after them. My mother-in-law and Ethan never really showed any genuine remorse. Talking further would be a waste of time. I decided to completely cut ties with them. We're quite busy, so I must go. With that, I hung up the phone and immediately blocked my mother-in-law's number. This should stop the calls. Surely Ethan and my mother-in-law will face tough times ahead. They had been lazy, and now they would need to work hard. Half a year passed. My mother-in-law and Ethan seemed to be in a desperate situation. And about Julia, afterward, Ethan and Julia got divorced. Julia was furious over Ethan's slip during the phone call. Their argument escalated, and she ended up going back to her parents' home. Julia, despite her age, returned to their parents' home without working. Before marrying Ethan, she had only part-time jobs and no full-time employment experience. With no particular skills, it would be difficult for her to become independent and work. Also, being in her 40s, it seemed unlikely that she would remarry easily. The prospects for a woman without a job or family might be limited, as harsh as it might sound. After their divorce, Ethan and my mother-in-law were living together in the spacious duplex. Moreover, they were burdened with a monthly loan of $2,000. Evidently, Ethan's salary alone was not enough, and he had to scramble working at construction sites after his main job. However, Ethan was getting on in years, and his body was protesting the unfamiliar labor. The ease he had enjoyed before was catching up with him. Even working in such conditions, they couldn't make ends meet. They needed money not just for the loan but also for living expenses. My mother-in-law was giving all her pension to Ethan to help with expenses. Both my mother-in-law and Ethan had almost no money to spend freely. The reason I know this is that my mother-in-law sometimes sends text messages. Since she can't call due to the blocked number, she sends emails instead. The content of the messages was increasingly serious. This month, they finally turned off our electricity. Please come back with Nick. I want to return to the carefree life we had before. Despite her plaintive messages, I quietly closed my smartphone and ignored them. They will probably continue to decline, but their fate is no concern of mine anymore. A year has passed since then. Nick and I have bought a small house. It's a dream home with a garden. It's a bit away from the station, but there's a supermarket nearby, and we aren't lacking anything. We bought this house because of the baby. I gently placed my hand on my belly and spoke to Nick. It would be nice if our child could grow up healthy here. I wonder if it's a boy or a girl. I want to buy clothes. It's exciting. Yeah, I'll be a dad soon. It's thrilling, Nick responded with deep emotion. We used to live in a rental apartment, but we decided to buy a house, wanting our child to grow up freely. Considering that I would be on maternity leave soon, we took a mortgage that could be paid on Nick's salary alone. Although it's a bit small, it's a grand castle for us. We could discuss the floor plan with the contractor any way we liked, and we are satisfied. Honestly, there were many issues while living with my mother-in-law, but now I feel very peaceful. I spoke to Nick next to me. Nick, I'm really happy right now. Nick smiled broadly and agreed with me. I'm grateful and proud that we could achieve such happiness. There may be various problems ahead. We might face issues that aren't easily resolved. Every time I want to work together with Nick and give it our all. That's what I was thinking.